Hello, I'm EnterElysium and welcome to our news. Today we're going to talk about GTA 5 finally having a release date on PC, but also having DRM, and Total War Warhammer being accidentally announced. So GTA 5 finally has a release date. It's going to be the 24th of March. It's been put back, presumably because, well, Rockstar have a very shady history of ports and maybe they're trying to do it right this time, hopefully. But the one thing that really concerns me is that now we have a release date and we have system specs. They also said you need an internet connection for a first-time registration when you activate the game, which, you know, that's becoming standard and it isn't too terrible, especially considering it's just a one-time activation thing. For those of you who never have an internet connection, which is very few of you, especially considering you're watching my video on the internet, you know, well, it sucks, but there are very few people who have that issue these days, especially people who will buy games on release like GTA 5. You also need an internet connection for multiplayer, which makes sense. But more worrying to me especially is you need an internet connection for periodic entitlement verification, which is such a douchey way of saying DRM. Periodic entitlement verification. Wow, I think that's my new hated term. For a start, they have DRM in that when you register the game at the very first time, you log in, blah, 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 you go, okay, well, you've got a legit copy, fine. And that's becoming a common form of DRM. And a lot of people would say that isn't too terrible. I mean, to a certain extent, Steam is DRM, and a lot of people don't recognize that, and a lot of people are completely fine with that. The issue is when you have things like always-on DRM. Now, periodic entitlement verification sounds like a sort of hybrid in that it won't always be online, but every now and again you need to check in. And there are several reasons this is bad. Firstly, with always on DRM, you get servers going down when they're strained. SimCity, Diablo. Now both people are going to say it to those like, oh, both of those multiplayer games. Yeah, SimCity, pretty much the entire point of the multiplayer was to make sure there was DRM that, you know, EA could go, oh, yeah, but no, it's not DRM, it's totally multiplayer. Bollocks. And with Diablo, although the multiplayer did need, you know, internet connection because it's multiplayer, the single player also needed you to sign in. So, yeah, that was always on DRM. So, servers could go down. There could be a bug in the software that stops it being able to communicate with the server, maybe. There could be, you know, the company could go bust. The software that they use to communicate with the servers could go down, like when the GameSpy stuff happened. There are so many... Your internet connection could go down, for God's sake. There are so many things that could happen, and it's never good for consumers. DRM is something that only favors the publisher, and possibly, you know, also other people involved in the distribution of profits of the games, etc. But it doesn't benefit consumers. It is something that is completely anti-consumer. Now, in the case of multiplayer games like SimCity and multiplayer games, you could go, well, actually, that's multiplayer. That is actually benefiting the consumer. And to a certain extent, yes, but to a certain extent, it is just DRM hiding as a multiplayer. So there are swings and roundabouts to it. But in the case of GTA 5, it appears that they're using a sort of check-in once and again, now and again. For a start, they already have the register, you know, okay, let's check you've got a legit copy when you first install. So I don't see why they need a second version. Now, of course, having 2 bits of DRM constantly checking is a good way to make sure that, you know, no one has hacked the DRM and whatever. But there is an issue there. If someone can hack the first part of the DRM, then they're probably going to be able to hack the second part of the DRM. And as we've seen before, no DRM is foolproof. I don't think I've seen a single piece of DRM that isn't continually hacked. A lot of games are actually made better by their DRM. A lot of this DRM actually has, in the past, slowed down games. There is nothing ever good about DRM, and it's very disappointing to see Rockstar doing this, especially considering, and this is why I have a big bugbear, they probably, and I can't say this for certain, they probably are releasing GTA 5 later than they could have because they didn't want it being pirated at the same time as it came out on consoles. Now, this happens with a lot of games. You see things like Assassin's Creed and so on. Ubisoft do this very often, is release a PC game after the console games. And a large part of the reason for that is because they don't want people pirating it at the same time it's coming out on console. Now, there is still no evidence, absolutely no evidence, to suggest that pirated copies detract from game sales. Simply, it is, people go, oh, well, it was being pirated 100,000 times. We could have made 100,000 times £40 a box. Or more if you're Ubisoft, because Ubisoft but there's no evidence that those sales would have been sold, and in fact there's a lot of evidence that suggests that those sales actually make up either a small percentage of those would have been sales, or in fact the inverse is true and that piracy actually promotes the game. It certainly happened with books before now. So it doesn't make sense that they've, for a start, probably delayed the game to make sure that it doesn't get pirated launch, and then they're introducing not just the entitlement verification when you load it, but the periodic entitlement verification. It just seems heavy-handed. Now, it isn't always on DRM, and that is terrible, or at least that's a good thing, but you can't exactly go, oh, well, you didn't do something terrible, you just did something bad, so good for you. No, Rockstar, this is bad. Now, as for the fact that the release of the game has been delayed ever so slightly from, I think it was going to come out originally in late January or early February or something, to late March, I'm perfectly happy with that. If they need to fix the game, they need to make sure it works, then good. Rockstar have a very shady history of PC ports, so I'm perfectly happy to make sure it works, because I'd rather have a game that works than a game that doesn't work. But I'd rather have a game with no DRM, because DRM is not beneficial to me, it's not beneficial to you, unless you happen to be Rockstar watching this video, in which case, please stop it. What can I say? Not much. They're not going to see as high sales as they would because it's already been out on console for such a long time. A lot of the hype over GTA 5 has kind of gone a little bit down. However, it is still a big game, and eventually I might pick it up. But it's very disappointing to see that they've got DRM in it. Also, another thing is, surely that's a game that's ripe for modding, yet entitlement verification might be buggered or screwed, or might even be a way of just verifying that you haven't installed a mod, which makes no sense because mods actually improve games. We have seen Long War made Enemy Unknown, XCOM, get massive sales continue, and people continue to play it, and people continue to buy the DLC just because Long War requires it. You see the same thing with Mountain Blade Warband, a game that I only really suggest because there are mods. You see the same thing with a lot of games. I mean, come on, Civilization, for God's sake. Anyway, the last bit of news is that Total War Warhammer was accidentally announced by someone mentioning it in a art book by Creative Assembly, saying, oh, it's great to work on the Total War franchise, and I'm really looking forward to games like Total War Warhammer. Whoops. They haven't officially announced this game, but now they have accidentally in their own official art book. So Total War Warhammer will be coming at some point, which is, I think, a good thing. I like the idea of it. I'm all for more Warhammer games, except for the fact that Games Workshop have kind of been selling the IP down the drain recently to basically anyone who asked for it. I miss the days of THQ when THQ had a legitimate reason to go, yeah, we're the only people who can do 40k. Oh well, I guess now anyone can make a game of it, but at least the good news is I somewhat trust Creative Assembly, although considering the last game that they made was so much an abysmal failure, just misrepresented the graphic quality, tried to stifle YouTube coverage of it, didn't run a lot of PCs, bugged out, buggy, bad design choices, bad UI, crashing, slowdowns. I think there were corrupted saves as well. Just so many terrible things with the last game that I just hope they make this a good game because, well, to be honest, I miss playing Total War games and enjoying them. I just miss being able to enjoy a Total War game. If I went back and played one, I would go all the way back, like 3 or 4 iterations or whatever it is, to Medieval 2. So I really hope they don't screw it up, and I wonder how much of it is Creative Assembly and how much of it is Sega. There's one thing you'll never really know at this point. I mean, Sega have a bad rep, but occasionally they do nice things, but they have a very bad rep for a lot of other stuff, especially to do with, YouTube coverage. Oh well. Anyway, I've been EnterElysium. We're going to end it there. If you've liked today's episode, please remember to like, because it, supports and helps and stuff. And if you're not subscribed and you want to see more, well, I guess subscribing would help. Stay shiny.